Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Jump Seat. For those joining for the first time, the Jump Seat is a weekly spotlight bringing you key industry leadership, thought, and subject matter experts, as well as next-gen insights affecting both you and your fire department. Hosted by two Jump Seat firefighters, myself, John Martins, along with my co-host here, Mr. Dave Durstein. How are you, sir?
Great, John. It's great to see you again. Another week has passed, and we get to have another fun afternoon of excitement.
Indeed, we do. So today is actually number 33 for those joining in. And for those that are coming on, do something new today. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And we're really making this an engaging live event. And so let us know where you're coming from or your department. And we'll be sure to put you guys in the comments. And as we get going with our topic here today, make it a really open discussion environment. So Dave, moving to the next steps here. What do we got going on in the fire service this week?
Yeah, there's several unique things, but I found one story that popped up on my news feed here, and I've got a little video that kind of goes along with it. And so I don't know if anybody else, any of our followers who are online there, actually had an incident occur similar to this, right? So this one actually took place in Kentucky. And Campbellsville, Kentucky. The fire actually happened on December 2nd, but essentially there was a wholesale wood, hardwood interiors building fire, and they actually were on scene working the fire actively for about 10 hours. Crews remained on scene for about 24 hours, but during the initial call, there was a firefighter who was in the process of trying to start to drag LDH hose, and the community just jumped right in, right? And so this was one of those times where you kind of look at it and think, in this world of 2020 where everything is bad, we're in the middle of a pandemic, the world is coming to an end. You see things like this where the community just jumps in and helps. And so it's great to see. I know I've had that experience happen on a call for me before, where we had some guys standing there as you're trying to drag a big long line, and they say, "What can you do?" And you say, "Just drag this from here to there." So it was great to see in this scenario. Obviously, I'm sure those guys in Campbellsville, Kentucky, were appreciative dragging. I don't know what it looked like go by there, probably 300 or 400 feet, maybe more of LDH hose.
Quickly,
I don't know, John, you ever have the community jump in and want to help on a scenario and a scene?
Yes, it happens, and it's always appreciated. And honestly, we've seen in our area, while fires obviously aren't good, especially for someone's property and home and all that, we've seen people become firefighters that if normally wouldn't have if had they not seen what it takes and all the work required to get the job done. So it's with bad there's good, and that's what we've seen locally before. After a recent fire, we had several guys decide they wanted to join our department, and they're going through their probationary periods right now. So pretty neat.
It really is, and that's the fun piece of the fire service. And I know there's a fine line between public involvement and safety in the same side of things. But I thought that was just an interesting thing to share, specifically around, we're hearing so much negativity, and I was glad to see a positive help to the fire service in the end there as well. So great job to you folks in Kentucky. And, if any of you who are following, share comments as well of when maybe this has happened to you. We love to hear those stories as well. But, John, I think, we've got a great show today. And you mentioned there earlier, right before we jump to those happenings in the fire service about commenting and getting their feedback. So we actually do want you guys to engage, you viewers out there who are watching live. And so if you comment in the comments field on whatever avenue you're following, it does pop up for us. We do see it, and we can share those comments with our guests as well as address any of those items as well. And we love that interactive approach. So please don't hesitate to do that here today. John, why don't you take us right into the jump seat here?
Yeah, so without further ado, this is part 2. So for everybody watching, we did start a 3-part series last week, so you may want to start from scratch or start at square one, as these will somewhat build upon each other. But this is part 2 of a 3-part series called A Deeper Look. It's really going into the cancer in our fire service, the science behind that, and some of the things we just haven't heard before. We've all heard wash your gear, keep it clean. So now it's change out your hood after the fire and get a clean one, right? This is way beyond that, and this is some research that's really been under wraps for a while, and we're here to go to some new depths, excuse me, within the topic of foam and cancer and some of the things we can do to make our fire service better. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest here, Chief Gary Baum. He's coming in again. You may see him familiar from last week. Chief Baum is joining us again. We didn't scare him off, but today we're going to talk A versus B foam. And again, it's going to be a deeper look. So it's not just the your everyday, foam discussion. So Gary, thanks for coming and welcome to the Jump Seat. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. I'm very well. I'm blessed.
Fantastic.
It's an honor to be back. So I look forward to today, and hopefully we can share some good information today. So.
Yeah. Hey, Gary, one of the big things I think, for those of you who are watching that missed the show last week, you got the introduction of some of the testing that Gary has been conducting. Gary, maybe take just a quick 30-second snippet and maybe give us a look of back to why you did this testing, what it kind of was as kind of a recap to last week, and what are some of the results you're showing. So I know it's just a Reader's Digest version, but just a real quick.
It actually fits into how we're going to transition into today's program. So, and Dave, we had this conversation yesterday about what does firefighter foam training look like in today's fire service. And when I took firefighter 1, it's maybe a 20-minute PowerPoint that would rip through it, and then okay, let's go out back. You pull the e-ductor out of the truck, and the last time that it was probably used is when they did foam training a year ago. And we get a 5-gallon bucket, we squirt some Dawn dish soap in it, we make bubbles, and then put it away. And so as my positions changed in the fire service, and I came into operational aspects, and I started to have to interface with firefighting foam, and then also too as a field staff instructor, I went and taught a class on firefighting foam, and I just read the PowerPoint, and as I'm reading through it, I have no idea what any of that meant, and that just kind of spurred me to go to start investigating more, because I knew there was more to it. So as I was doing that, and I started to read about Class A foams, and I kept reading this thing about carbon affinity, and I'm like, oh, I understand what that is. And then tying that in with the at the time the new fire behavior material that was coming out, and that smoke is full of carcinogens, and understanding that carcinogens are carbons, and the theory came up that if I could use Class A foam that has an affinity for other carbons like carcinogens, can I not reduce those contaminants, poisons, toxins in smoke field environments, and make things change the atmosphere? And that's the research, and that's what we talked about last week. And again, it's basic chemistry and physics. And again, no matter how many years you have in the fire service, you can't change physics and you can't change chemistry.
I still want the T-shirt that says that, by the way.
We should make them up, right?
We will.
I think I see something brought to you by the Jump Seat. Little plug for ourselves on the shirt, right? Hey, they're good, John. I'll have to work on that.
All right.
But,
good.
So Gary, diving into this, obviously there's a lot of research around the use of foams there for applications in firefighting. But this one here is actually, to reduce the carcinogens, the use of Class A foam and or CAFs to reduce the carcinogens that are in the air on those initial attacks. But when you really break it down, you've got really kind of two different buckets, right? You got Class A foam and you got Class B foam.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the topic of today. And so really at a high level,
and
maybe even go deeper.
Don't mix them in your pump, or
don't mix them.
May not be.
And we'll talk about that too. So.
That never happens. That never.
Oh
happens.
Yeah, well, that's an expensive price tag. You learn that lesson. So
what's the difference?
Overview, Gary. Yep.
What? Sorry, what's that?
Oh, we were both saying the same thing. Go ahead and give us kind of a brief overview of the two by definition, and kind of a quick recap.
Again, I think the first thing that, and in the years that I've been an instructor and have interfaced with people, and again, we talked about an uneducated American fire service. I think the thing that drives this today is, as I come around, that there's a lot of firefighters in the U.S. that don't know that there's a difference between A and B. They just associate firefighting foam as firefighting foam. And, today there's this, what's the lack of a word or bird? This concept that all firefighting foam is fluorinated, and it's, a cancer-causing agent from the fluorine. And that's where today is of importance, is to separate the two out. So it's going to become a, basic foam discussion. So we'll track down, Class A foams, because it dovetails off of last week real nice. So as we discussed last week, Class A foams are hydrocarbon-based surfactants. And surfactant, that's just a shorter name for surface active agents. Long and short of it is that they help release the surface tension of water. So in the slang worms, they said it makes water wetter. But there's other components to Class A foam that make it functional that we just discussed last week, and we'll obviously go back over and discuss that again. And so you have to understand that in the realm of hydrocarbon-based surfactants, there's just not one fit-all shoe type. There's actually dozens and dozens and dozens of different compounds, and all of those have a little bit different functions. Some have a stronger affinity for carbon than others. Others don't really want to interface with carbon as much, and it has to do with, charges. And again, try not to get too far into the weeds. But again, there's even differences, and you see that today in our homes. You talk about using detergents. The soap that you use, or the detergents that you use for body washes and for doing dishes, those have a higher bubble or higher foaming capacity versus those you use for your dishwasher or washing machine, because you don't want bubbles flowing out of the top of your washing machine. And all of that becomes part of the formula that the chemists put in to make these foams work. So Class A foam, again, for the most part, the bucket that you get is 99 point whatever percent water, and then they put the chemicals in there that are going to make it the hydrocarbon surfactant that you need. So you can just simply look at SDS sheets, and they'll tell you for the most part that's in there. And you're going to get a specific kind of a hydrocarbon. And again, to stay out of the weeds, these are going to have two effects. One of them is that you're going to have the ability to make bubbles. So there's that detergent component to it, because you need bubbles. And then the other one is there'll be a hydrocarbon surfactant in there that has a stronger affinity for carbon particles than, say, another kind of surfactant. And that's the formula, basically the formula that's put together to make your Class A foam concentrates. And so this is what it then leads to, your ability to do things in regards to carbon particles. And, the U.S. Fire Administration has, released information. If you go back into 1992, they released a document on using, Class A foams in structure fires. And they even said that using Class A foam can actually help you preserve evidence in an arson fire investigation. And it's because of this emulsification process that Class A foam has that actually encapsulates the gasoline or whatever the accelerant is. And so then you can store it. And I've had these conversations with our own state fire marshals, investigators, they're arson investigators. And I'm like, what are your thoughts about, Class A foam? And they're like, well, we would rather not really use it. I go, because it destroys evidence? Oh, no, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, it'll preserve the evidence. The only thing I don't like about it is that I need to know what the chemical makeup of the foam is so that I can account for that in my evidence. And so, and he also went on to say, hey, if any fire department's going to use foam, we want them to use CAFs, because number one, there's less water, but number two is because of the function of the CAFs bubble. And so, here at our department, we carry Class A foam. I know exactly what the brand is, and we have an SDS sheet, back at the station that if we ever do need to use it on a fire, we can provide that information to the investigator. So there's that whole chemistry component again about your Class A foams, your hydrocarbon surfactants. and their ability to have this attraction for affinity. And how do you apply that to your normal day? Well, again, if you get grease, you're out working on a car or whatever, and your hands are dirty, grimy, that's all carbon-based stuff. You come in, you take your soap, and you wash your hands with hand soap detergent, and you're going to watch your hands, the soap bubbles, turn color, because it's going to encapsulate those carbons. So that's really pretty much your Class A foams. And then, like I said, the other part too is that it does have this wetting agent part. And I know, Dave, and you and I talked about, what is a wetting agent versus a Class A foam. Wetting agent doesn't bubble as much. It doesn't have the detergent component to it. It's really pretty much just releases the surface tension of water, and it does what it says it does. It penetrates the surface of your fuel, so it's less likely to give off, vapor to turn into a fire. So,
yeah, so that terminology, wet water, right? That's what.
Yeah, wet water. And again, you're not going to get the bubbles, so you don't have the energy that you do in your bubble structure. And as I talk to folks out there, understand that bubbles are good because bubbles are a way that you store energy. And that energy is, as the bubbles break down, it slowly releases additional surfactants and this lighter than water into fuel surfaces, and that's really pretty much how you have your Class A's. And as far as out in the realm, as far as certifications and those kind of components, there's the QPL, the Qualified Product List, that's through the U.S. Forest Service, and they look at foams and they look at biodegradability of the agent, and then of course the pH of the agent, and then it has to do with aircraft, because obviously in the fire service you use aircraft for putting on Class A agents. So you want to make sure that the pH is compatible with aircraft skins, and that's where you're going to have a pH on your Class A foams, for the most part, just slightly greater than 7, just slightly above neutral, and that's really about what you're going to find. So as you all know, metals, and we're talking metals like aluminum and that kind of stuff, yep, they tend to be just slightly on the basic side as well on the pH scale, because that's just where metals fall in the periodic table. And so then you got to make sure that they're not acidic, because you certainly don't want acids working on the skin of aircraft. And so again, that's something else that I've dealt with. I've been in situations where I've gone up to chief officers and said, hey, we need to use Class A foam. We could put a blanket of Class A foam on this barn and get out of here a lot faster. And I said, what if we batch mix it? And they're like, oh, I don't want to run foam through my pump because it's corrosive. And I'm like, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt the metal of your pump. It's not going to hurt the gaskets of your pump. Do I need to, flush the pump when I'm done? Yeah, no different than when you're in the shower and you lather up before you step out, you want to rinse off. So I think that's the components with Class A foams. And I think if you go back, if you weren't on last Friday, if you go back and watch last Friday's podcast, I think the evidence is pretty solid that it does what it says it does. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Gary. And I don't know if did you bring your molecule design today?
I've got a short little video that I found on YouTube that does a really pretty cool job on how that works. So we'll show that.
But that's one of those cool things is in the Class A, it actually, the way it's made is designed to, in fact, draw in the carbon particles, and that's why we were seeing some of the benefits that you were seeing last week, and that's the difference why a wetting agent doesn't have that same makeup to do that attraction and potentially the same impact that you were seeing in your results there during the testing. And while Gary pulls that up here,
yeah,
we'll jump into B foam here in just a minute to do a comparison between A and B and see the effects there as well. But I'll let Gary pull that up. Sorry, I put you on the spot, Gary. I know you were planning to do it probably a little later here.
No, you're fine. I'm just trying to make sure that I can get this to you. Let's see.
There it is.
Can you see that?
Just
It's
about.
coming here in just a second. Yep.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead and
If you want to make it bigger on your screen, yeah, that'll be perfect
Yep,
for
it's
it.
done. And then I'm just going to kind of knock it out. So again, this is off of YouTube. And I like it because it's a micelle. So when you have a hydrocarbon-based surfactant, a certain type of hydrocarbon surfactants, the one head of the molecule is polarized, and because it is polarized, it's going to have an attraction to water. Because here's something that the fire service doesn't understand, is that we do carry an awful lot of polar solvents around on our big red chariots, and that's because water is a polar solvent. And so that one head of the surfactant is going to be drawn towards the water, and with one end is hydrophilic, hydro loving, hydrogen being water, philic loving, hydrophilic. And this red dot in the center, this is obviously going to be what we're going to encapsulate. And you can start to see all of the blue round dots. Those are going to be your hydrophilic heads. And then you're going to have this basic lollipop structure. And that lollipop structure, this tail, that is your hydrophobic tail. But because it's hydrophobic, that now becomes your carbonphilic tail, if that makes sense. And so the head, the round head, is going to go out towards the water. The tail is going to be carbonphilic, and it's going to seek out this carbon particle, and it's going to attach itself, and that is the form of your micelle. So if you can think of, and I'm going to use the word schloads of these, that's what's going to encapsulate your carbon particles. And then they're actually going to do a cross cut here. And that would show that the carbon particle. So again, if this red material is your stain that's on your hands and whatnot, then it's going to be encapsulated. So as I was discussing yesterday, or I'm sorry, with you guys earlier, we did some videos, stuff around here. So as I said yesterday, we took 2 days ago, we took some OSB that had a rubberized surface to it, and I painted the surface using a paint roller of automatic transmission fluid. And because it's synthetic, it's carbon based, and we covered that surface. I went with automatic transmission fluid because of the color. It gives a very good color contrast. We painted that piece of 2x2 plywood with automatic transmission fluid, and then I just sprayed it with a wet cast that added about 0.5% Class A concentrate to it. And then I just let it drain. I just let the bubbles drain off, run down, recaptured it into a 5-gallon bucket, and then from there transferred it into this glass mason jar. And again, if we don't have the surfactant, the ATF is going to float on water, because water, it's got a polar solvent. It's not going to mix with the carbon particle. But this is it right here, and you can literally see the separation there. If this was true ATF, the water underneath wouldn't even be pink. It would be clear, and then you would have the red line to it. And now when I shake it up, and the agitation is now going to encapsulate that ATF again, it looks like Pepto-Bismol. And again, that's that chemical component of the hydrocarbons doing what we want. So I think that's probably a really pretty good examples on that. Again, there was no mechanical component to it like we showed with the decon last week with the scrubbing brush. It was literally just let the bubbles work. And then the bubbles, as the bubbles break down, the agent was doing what it was supposed to be doing with the encapsulating of the carbon particles. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's an amazing, amazing little show of how it actually works. I love that video because that video really kind of helped to draw it in on what was happening in your discussions and your tests from last week. Now let's talk a little bit about the Class B side of things. So I compare
Sure.
A versus B. What's the difference there? Because is B the same as A?
Well, so we'll transition slow. So first of all, B foams have hydrocarbon surfactants in them because they need that hydrocarbon surfactant to help develop the foam bubbles. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So as you know, David, on the industrial side, you know that bubbles are good.
Bubbles are great.
And then, inside of that, we talk about expansion ratios for a bubble structure. And those, of course, have, important components to them when we're dealing with interfacing with Class B fuels. So we have to have detergent to make the bubble structure. And the bubble structure is going to, number one, be the component that is going to give us that stored energy, which is, again, we talked about holding that agent inside the bubble structure. And then as the bubble structures break down, the agent continues to work out of that. And then, as you know, over time, the foam blanket finally just gives up giving up agent and it's not effective anymore. And then we're talking about, reapplication. Does that make sense? Yep. And so, again, you have an A component inside of and I'm going to use the word today, certified Class B foams, or, your fluorinated surfactants that come into that. So, and a good example, I think, for that is when we went back into our research that we did in 2018, we did a couple of fires where we used a firefighting foam that was certified as a B, but it was also sold as Class A because of its wetting agent standard. And so we educted it into the CAF system using just a regular foam eductor pickup tube, and then went it in there. And we used it on 2 fires, and again, where we were burning couches, and it performed similar to the other Class A foams, and that's because of the Class A component to that foam concentrate. So that shows that it does work. What's that?
Yeah, real quick, I'll say this too. I've seen a fair amount of some of the departments that out there. They have either evaluated or they're using or utilizing what they're calling AB. From what I'm hearing from you, Gary, is it's either certified, likely one or the other. It just may have properties that allow it to mimic some of the other side of that. Correct?
Yeah, and I think with the hypersensitivity of fluorinated surfactants right now, I wouldn't use a B foam on an A fire, if that makes sense.
Right.
And I think if you have the ability to have A and B foam on your apparatus, or you're going to carry it, I would have a qualified good Class A foam from a reputable foam manufacturer. And then on the other side, if I'm still in need of carrying Class B foams, I would have that as well. The A and B G-Whiz foams, I've never been a real advocate of G-Whiz anything. So, and again, with the B foams, the certified B foams that are fluorinated, I certainly wouldn't put those onto, Class A fires for a lot of reasons. And some of it just boils down to cost. The stuff is significantly more expensive. But then again, too, it would really be hard to explain away on why I put fluorinated surfactants on a barn fire.
Well, that, and it just right out of the gate, it really overcomplicates things. Obviously on the A side, we're 0 to up to 1% maybe, and on true B, we're 3, maybe 6, right? So to try to go A, B, to me, it just throws me for a loop. Like how do I pump this? How do I proportion this without wasting it? Because that's a big thing in our fire services.
Right. And, when in the times where I was involved in, operations, we would specifically lay stuff out for the engineer. If you're going to batch mix Class A foam, you have a 1,000-gallon tank, it's going to be 1 5-gallon bucket. If you had to do something with Class B foam, again, there had to be an educational piece to it on how we were going to do that. So again, it's just it just takes time to make sure people understand. And I think, again, that's the main reason for today, is that there's just a misunderstanding on the differences between A's and B foams. So again, B foam has a Class A component to it, and that's just simply the detergent part because we need the bubble structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you bring up a good point there in the midst of this, and you talked about the fluorinated foams, right? And fluorine in the foams. Where did this fluorine come from? And is there a difference with this fluorines that are actually out there?
Yeah, so that's good. And again, being the geeky person that I am, I had to find out where that came from. So my family has a good tradition of Navy personnel. My brother served, uncles. So as I began to research, fluorinated surfactants and wanted to know where it came from. So the United States Navy had 2 significant incidences on board aircraft carriers during Vietnam, of which the USS Forrestal fire was the one that was the most significant. I think it was like 134 or 144 firefighters were killed. It involved the aircraft that belongs to former Senator McCain, his A4 intruder. So long and short of it, that was a catastrophic incident in harm's way. I mean, the Forrestal was off the coast of Vietnam, and it was active bombing missions going on. And then a year or so later, a similar incident occurred on USS Enterprise, where again we had catastrophic incidents. And so the U.S. Navy called out for a synthetic foam that was lighter than water and lighter than jet fuel. And so there's company 3M got involved in it, and they developed a foam. And it was very effective, and the surfactant, the fluorinated surfactant that they were using, actually was like a waste product for them. So they were able to make this synthetic foam cheap, and it worked, and it passed. And the Navy bought it. I shouldn't say just the Navy, the military bought it, and I would imagine by the millions and millions and millions of gallons. And so that's kind of where the synthetic foams came out of a place was from the military end. And of course, the fluorinated surfactants is what creates the film forming foam. So
yeah, absolutely. If you ever played with it, it's actually a fun thing to do. Gary and I were talking about this yesterday. Just a training piece is actually to apply it on something. Watch that film actually lay itself out and run a blanket actually out in front of the foam bubbles themselves, because that's the benefit. It essentially, think of it like a lubrication. It's a lubricant running over top to let the foam flow smoother and flow faster over it almost. And I know it's not truly a lubricant, but in that kind of an application, maybe for some gearheads to grab a hold of. Yeah, it really does make a difference in how the foam flows, and
definitely
a hydrocarbon-based or even a polar solvent-based fire appropriately.
So, the component with the fluorine is the fluorinated surfactant. It interfaces with water. It's not a really big fan of water, which we've seen because, there's fluorinated surfactants that are used in water repellent materials. But what it really doesn't like is carbon. And so it will shed carbon post-haste. So inside of your Class Bs, not only do you have the hydrocarbon-based surfactants, but now we have the addition of the fluorinated surfactants. And so then the fluorinated surfactants are going to be in your bubbles. And as soon as you start applying foam, that fluorine is going to start falling out of the bubbles, and it's going to race out in front, and that's going to create that, film-forming foam. And that's what the military wanted, and then later that transferred into, the civilian air. Mil spec AFFF, military specification AFFF, currently is required by the FAA, or it is required by the FAA, but also too is, the military still uses it, and of course it's used in industry. And that's because that film forming foam from fluorine, it works. And if anybody can ever remember the video of the fire, I think it was in the early 70s, it was in Hawaii, where the firefighter was running through the foam blanket, trips and falls, and all of a sudden there's this great big flare up of fire, and then within a few moments that fire's gone. And that's that rehealing component of the foam that was from fluorine, because the fluorine is going to go back in and fill that rupture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the component of fluorine. So in 2000, 3M got out of the foam market, and it has to do with the chains that they were using. So PFAS, PFOS, everybody for most is hearing those terms. Those legacy surfactants were the C8 and C7 chains, chemical chain formulas. And those formulas have really, 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 really long half-lives. And which means for breakdown.
Gary, I want to take just a second, and as we're talking through a lot of this at a very in-depth level, scientifically and with chemistry, what are maybe the top 2 or 3 misconceptions you've seen over the years with teaching and instructing that guys tend to get confused on or struggle with grasping within Class B? Because it is much different, completely different chemically than A. What are a few of those things where guys tend to get off track with?
Again, is the big one is polar solvents versus hydrocarbons, and you start talking about the firefighters that there's a difference. What do we mean by hydrocarbons? And you have to explain to them hydrocarbons. That means gasoline, diesel, kerosene, crude oil. La-da-da-da-da. And then, we went through a period of time in the early 70s, 80s that, AFFF was good enough. Well, as we know today, especially in the municipal side, alcohols are way more prevalent than anything else. And so then you start talking to them about polar solvents. And that's when you really start getting that ghost look in the eyeballs, like, what are you talking about? And then, of course, even inside of polar solvents, there's difference, because there's a difference between acetones and ketones. Those are polar solvents. And if you're using a 3,6 mil spec AFFF, which is fine, there's a reason why you have to put 6% on those acetones and ketones. And it has to do with the molecular structure of the foam. You need a thicker blanket to keep those vapors bound up. That all changes when you start dealing with alcohols like ethanol and methanol and isopropyl alcohol, because those polar solvents are so much more aggressive. As we know, it will literally just pull the water right out of the foam blanket. And I think that's the biggest thing to try to explain to people on why there's a difference between AFFF and ARAFFF.
Yeah, that is a great piece of that puzzle of is there a difference between AFFF and ARAFFF? And when you start dealing with the alcohol-based fires, you really can see it because of that natural attraction of water from an alcohol.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I always talk about is, water and alcohol are both polar solvents, and they kind of look at you like, well, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, do you like mixed drinks? Because, I mean, when you're talking about a mixed drink and you're putting, Jack and Coke together, Jack and Coke really they mix. Or the other thing I talk about is, 100 proof whiskey. What is 100 proof whiskey? Well, it's a lot of water in there, So it's because, the alcohol sees water not as water, but it sees it as 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It literally pulls it apart and then resticks it back on as an addition to the alcohol. So you end up making more booze, just a little bit less strong.
So Gary, in the scheme of things here, when we were starting to talk about bees there and them, their ability to attract carbon or ability to resist carbon. And so, can I achieve the same scrubbing we talked about last week, truly in a Class A fire, that to reduce those carcinogens with a Class B foam?
Well, like I said, we only did 2 fires with the Class B foam. That was on a request of a friend of mine. I mean, we've seen similar results. Again, we're only talking 2 fires, but out of the 16 that we did, we could look at them and go, oh, okay, yeah, this performed in a similar fashion. Again, this is where that A component of a certified B foam was working as far as that. But now, again, you're talking about 3-dimensional fire where we're shooting the foam into smoke. We're not talking about putting it onto a flat liquid spill fire or a flat spill where we need to suppress vapors. Yeah. And I think that's another thing too, that there's a misconception. Well, I can't use Class A foam on a flammable liquid fire. Not a big one, but if you certainly have a gasoline fire coming out of a vehicle or car or whatever, you can get knocked down with Class A foam. What you're not going to get is the vapor suppression, and that's because you don't have the fluorine component to that to suppress the vapors. And they're like, well, I still don't get it. I go, hey, have you ever used training foam to put out a liquid fire in training? Well, yeah. I says, well, Class A foam and training foam are very similar. And so the nice thing about it, though, is that when it's all said and done, I can walk back over to the pit and relight it right over top of the foam blanket because the vapors are still coming underneath because there's no cap from the fluorinated surfactants.
Yeah, and that's a key piece of it when you think about it in the industrial aspect of that as well. Gary, what about these things that are coming out in the market today? And we have a bigger trend called green foam, specifically in the bee world as well. So, what's there for these green bee or replacement for AFFFs that are now hitting the market, and we are going to see prevalent more and more in the future? I have a feeling.
Well, it's inevitable. I mean, you're seeing individual states inside the U.S. are putting referendums on who can have certified. Let me back up. We'll say fluorinated Class B foams, and you're seeing that, especially out west. Washington State, California, Oregon. I mean, they're asking for their municipal departments to give it up and they're setting dates on those. So that's coming and. Again, my biggest thing is, and I hope you all don't take this wrong. My only concern about green bee foams is going to be training and education to the fire service, because right now my biggest problem is we have people don't understand the difference between A and B period, and that's worth the B, the fluorinated stuff that we've just been talking about versus the A. Now we're going to take a whole unique different creature. These green non-fluorinated Class Bs, and we're going to put them out there. And my question to the industry, and that's the people that make the foam, the people that are going to make the appliances to apply it, and other agencies, is how are we going to get this information out to the firefighters on the street, so they know how to do this properly. So we don't want to hurt or kill anybody. And so when you remove fluorine from the foams, your only choice is to go back to hydrocarbon-based surfactants. The chemical makeup of those hydrocarbon-based surfactants are going to be a little bit different than what you would find in just your straight, Class A's. We still have to have a detergent component to it because, again, we still need this bubble aspect. And like I said, foam bubbles are stored energy, and as they break down due to gravity, they're going to collapse. That releases that energy out, and then you're going to continue to get this going. So what I understand on the green foams is there's this chemical formula. Again, we're talking about different kinds of hydrocarbons. There are hydrocarbons out there that don't have a real strong love for the carbon vapors, and so that will help keep the vapor down, if that makes sense. Okay, and so then you're going to get a similar, I guess the best word I can use right now is a cap on your flammable liquid spill or fire. The strength from that cap is going to come from the amount of concentrate in your foam blanket, along with the density of your foam blanket.
Yeah, so that comes down to aspiration in the bubble creation.
Correct, and you're going to have to interface with. And my understanding too is that the greater the volatility of the flammable liquid, you're going to see an increase in the need in percentage of concentrate in your blanket, and you're also going to have to juice up your bubble structure expansion because you need that more energy to help keep that cap. I don't want to use the word film because you don't have a film. It's a cap. It's like a barrier that's going to help keep those vapors suppressed. And obviously there's going to be some level of chemical bonding between those chemicals in your foam blanket that's going to help keep it together. Because what I'm reading is that there is a healing there is a healing component to those foams, as I've watched information or read information that, especially airports, civilian airports have been, doing testing with these green foams, dragging hose through it and that kind of stuff that you would normally do in an airport incident. And they're seeing some healing component to it. It's just different than fluorine and foams. It just doesn't come back the same way. It can't, because of the chemical change, or the chemical makeup is different. So, the other question is going to be with the green foams is compatibility. What is going to be the compatibility of the chemical makeups of the foams that come from different manufacturers? If you're familiar with the Lac-Mégantic incident that took place in Quebec, it was like 2014. One of the issues they had is they started mixing foam concentrates, and those were fluorinated surfactants, and they didn't play real nice and ended up making a mess. And so the one thing about fluorinated surfactants is that for the most part, there's only a couple of companies in the U.S. that make those surfactants, and so when a company's buying them to put them into their Class B foams, you're really seeing quite a bit of compatibility based on their chemical IDs. It may not be the same for the greener foam. So that's why, again, I'm not against it. As a matter of fact, I think it's inevitable. It's coming, and obviously we do need to be concerned about the environment. But what I really want to make sure is that we educate the people that need to be educated to do it. And again, I think, David, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think in many of the states, the industrial complexes are going to be able to keep, their legacy fluorinated foams online. There might be an eventual changeover, but that's because those products work, and they work very well. And obviously, if you have an incident at an industrial complex and you're going to use foam, when it's all said and done, you're going to hire a cleanup contractor to come in anyway, and there's going to be remediation. The EPA is going to come and probably park out a trailer there to sit there to make sure that's done right, and rightfully so. But the other question is too, though, is that in many of the industries, if they become overwhelmed, their 911 call is to the municipal departments. What if the municipal departments don't have the same kind of foams, and then how is that all going to play? So again, there needs to be this education and planning component to it. And right now, I just don't know if it's moving right way. That's my talk. So
yeah, I think that's a good point. And we probably have some foam folks following here. So if anybody wants to comment on that, if there's experts watching, please feel free to do so. We did have one comment come in. I know, Gary, we weren't going to get into brands of foam on what you use for your testing, but one question did come in that said, hey, did you test using F500? We know you didn't, but any thoughts or comments on that, and how familiar are you with that agent?
I'm familiar with it, but I don't want to speak on it inside of this format, because you do now have a name brand up on the screen, and we've promised that this was going to be non-brand based. So I know I did mention the one brand that we were using, but that was just to let everybody know that in 2020 we were using a single brand of foam concentrate, period.
Yeah. So Kevin, you're welcome to reach out to Gary directly for the additional feedback on that, and we will throw his contacts up here for you to reference though as well. Gary, as it was last week, time flies when we're having fun. We're already 50 minutes into the show. One of the big things, obviously, the cool thing is as you talked about, like certified based foams, the true carbon attracting foams, you have seen success with them reducing the carcinogens in the smoke and in the environment that firefighters have been in. Now, obviously, the bee testing you did was very, very small. But where other ways are we seeing that exposure to carcinogens happen, and how can we reduce it even further? So smoke is one. Any other ideas, suggestions when dealing with foam, specifically around the whole thing that all foams are cancer causing?
Foams are bad. Foam bad. Yeah. You know what? I had an opportunity to go down to Texas A&M last June and participate in an industrial fire school, and it was an eye-opening experience. And I remember there was one of the presenters worked in an environmental cleanup company, and he had showed some data on the tremendous amount of carcinogens and toxins that went into the environment, into the atmosphere, on burning fuel tanks or crude oil tanks or at refinery type fires. And it was one of those things they were talking about. What is the balance that you weigh, whether you continue to let this burn and the environment's going to take a hit in the air, or do we use fluorinated surfactants and put the fire out and then deal with the cleanup component of it afterwards? And I don't have the answer to that. As we well know, and we teach this, again, if you have a derailment in your jurisdiction and you're talking about several rail cars of flammable liquids that are on fire, you're not putting that fire out within the first 20 minutes. And depending upon the amount of fuel that's spilt, it might be 2 days. I think it was almost 48 hours before they were able to get enough foam even into Loch Megantic to even consider putting on it. So in that instance, it's just better to let it burn. So there's that fine area. So I guess I don't really have an answer to that on the B side. Going back to my research, and again, that's what I can go back to the best. When you're talking about Class A fires, and this can include tires, and I've had this conversations with other folks. Is today's structure fire, is it really a Class A fuel?
Great question.
Because if you look at it, once that couch, chair, carpeting starts to degrade, again, if you just go back to the paper that Fabian released in 2010, all of those toxins you can find in the NIOSH Pocket Guide, and many of them are Class B. In their natural state, they're liquids, or they could potentially be, even gas or solids. But again, that three-dimensional fire, and now I'll go back to my concept of smoke package, it's all Class B fuels. They're just suspended inside of a smoke because they can't burn clean. And you certainly have this ability to scrub the environment with using these Class A foams. And I talked about this last week, that I would like to see us move away from Class A foam because of just the correlation that foam is foam, and just stop using Class A foam, and then have some terminology for that. I like the concept. I coined it myself, and I'll pat myself on the back on it. But carcinogen absorbing foaming, whether it's solution or systems.
Just to clarify there, you're not a proponent of not using Class A foams. You're a proponent of the terminology Class A.
Yes. Oh, I'm all for. And I've tried, when I'm talking with other people in the industries, I don't even use the word Class A foam. I'll say hydrocarbon-based surfactant agents, just to be clear that we're not talking about Bs, fluorine stuff.
Yep.
So it's just easier to say carcinogen absorbing foaming solution, just because everybody perks to it because of the whole thing with firefighter cancer, and that's that reduction. So the component with the Class B foams is when we're talking about the two-dimensional spill fire part, where you need to put either a film to cap that vapor, or you're going to put this non-fluorinated hydrocarbon surfactant that is good for putting this cap or barrier on top of a flammable liquid so that we don't get vapor to come through it.
Absolutely.
2018, when I was in Amsterdam, ICAFs, and I had actually known of the research, but a gentleman by the name of Graham Day presented, and Graham at the time worked at Heathrow. And Heathrow had been doing a tremendous amount of tests using Class B green foams in conjunction with CAFs. And they were doing all kinds of tests in the UK using not only the green foams for the spill fire component of an aircraft incident, but also the three-dimensional fire that you would get from leaking fuel out of an engine or out of a wing. and they had the evidence to say that, hey, I don't even use purple K inside of my Class B foam anymore to knock down that three-dimensional fire. That this green Class B foam injected through CAFs was knocking it down. And so they actually got approval from UK Civil Air Authority and eventually ICOA to change. And the last time I talked with Graham, he was coming to the US. He was going to go up to Oshkosh because they were completely redesigning their crash rigs because, number one, they didn't have to carry as much water anymore because they were using CAFs. And because they were able to not have to carry so much water, the vehicles could be lighter. And then since their vehicles were lighter, they didn't need to have diesel engines. So they were transforming their crash rigs to electric. So I don't know if that actually went the full weight on the vehicles, but I do know that Heathrow's ARF vehicles are CAFs units.
Yeah, it's a amazing change there in the industry, and really what CAFs can do, and even the opinions on CAFs. And we won't get into that because we've almost killed a whole hour here. But I do want to give one little plug out there, Gary, and that is if you guys are looking for CAFs, you want to know more about CAFs, feel free to call this guy right here, right there, John Martins. He'll help you out, or any of the guys from IDEX Fire and Safety, our colleagues there are more than happy to help out. But we had a couple questions pop in here too, Gary, and one right at the bat was Mark Cummins. Hey, Mark, thanks for joining in. You were, I think, on last week as well. It's glad to see you here again. But he made a comment that, hey, he's calling it carbon absorbing foam. So yeah, same kind of concept. I think that you were kind of alluding to there, a little different terminology, but the same principle as a whole. And I wanted to comment on another one here from Jerry Hughes. And why can't trains be equipped with foam tanks and water and Class A and B foam with enough hose to allow the fire departments to fight the fire? Oh my gosh, it would be novel and an incredible concept. And one of those things in the industrial firefighting world is contain. Don't lose containment. Whether it's a spill fire or a tank fire, you want to make sure you can keep it contained so you can actually apply the film forming foams to actually keep it in its location and don't let it run and flow all over the place. But a novel idea on train cars actually carrying their own agents to supply what's on board. Hey, you never know where things are going to go in the future.
Yeah. Well, Gary, thank you again for coming on. I know time goes quick here when we're having fun, and we're really in ways we are scratching the surface. This is a much deeper, broader topic, no doubt. And so, it's one of those things we do our best on the jump seat. But I did put your email there for anybody that wants to discuss other things offline. We can do that, and not to forget that we'll be back in a week. So, Gary, I'll leave your email up here, but thank you very much again, and we will see you next Friday.
Thank you again, guys. Appreciate it greatly. So.
You bet. Very good. Well, hey, everybody, thanks again. I got Gary's email up on the screen. I did want to give a quick preview as well for next week. Next week will be part 3, concluding the series, and that'll be on air monitoring. And that's going to be something we're going to have Patrick back in. He was on part 1. Really discussing that and kind of completing the loop here of how this topic and carcinogen reduction and just the topic of cancer can be, how we can take more intelligence and take home information and apply it to our safety and the safety of our fellow firefighters. So without further ado, thanks everybody again for joining. You can check this out via Facebook Live as well as YouTube. Give us a follow if you aren't already. Give us a follow online, and thanks for the comments. They came in a little late, but we will certainly be looking forward to seeing everybody again next week in the jump seat. Anything else from you, Dave?
No, John, it's another great show. Sorry we went long, I guess. That'd be my only big thing, but it's great information. And we love seeing the comments again. So please, if you're here next week, comment away, even over the weekend comment. We love seeing it. Keith Clausen, thank you for the comment there on a great show. We're glad to deliver this to you guys. And, our other big thing would be spread the word. It only helps us by all of you guys sharing it. So click share on the bottom of your social media, get the word out, because I think stuff that Gary's doing is great. And that's kind of why John and I do this every week. It's not just for our charming good looks. You can laugh, John. But really, it's really to make the fire service better, find it better than where we found it, and educate everybody. So thank you all for joining. Have a great weekend. We'll see you all next week, 3 o'clock Eastern time in the jump seat.